Hello, welcome back from All-Star break. This is the FanDuel Punch-Out. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. And it was a long break. It was nice to relax for a couple days, but it's also nice to be back to baseball and be able to play in some big contests. And FanDuel, the Grand Slam tonight, $100,000 to first place. So I'm sure you and I and many others are going to be chasing that top prize. So hopefully we can help you out here a little bit with some of our favorite plays for the day.
Yeah, if we want to dive into pitcher right away, obviously the top guy, salary-wise and from a projection standpoint, Jose Fernandez against the Phillies. He's going to be an extremely popular play, but I think that's justified, especially in cash games. It's just one of those nights where if you don't have him, you might be behind the eight ball, trying to play catch-up with your hitters. So, I mean, he's expensive, but I think you can blend him in with these value plays, build a solid lineup around him. And he's looked great over his first three starts back. So, against one of the worst offenses, even though he's on the road, I think you can safely deploy him.
Yeah, I think he's got to be your top option tonight as well. And 10,500, he's expensive compared to everyone else, but not like Clayton Kershaw or Max Scherzer expensive. So, like you said, you can definitely still fit him in. You put him in your lineup, you got over $3,000 per player. That's more than enough to make a fine lineup tonight. So, other options that are interesting: Noah Syndergaard, $8,400, is facing off against the Cardinals, a team you don't typically want to target with pitchers. But Syndergaard coming off an incredible performance right before the break. And the Cardinals, 11th in the league in team WOBA, 318 against righties, but just a 136 ISO. They strike out only 19% of the time, so you don't like that. But Syndergaard's just been incredible, and there's really not a single one batter that you're worried about in this lineup. So, as a team offense, I think that Syndergaard, especially at his price, still down at only $8,400, is a really good tournament option tonight.
Yeah, and I mean he'll be less around too. I think a lot of guys are going to reach up for Fernandez and some other quality options, like we should say Sonny Gray is in a nice spot at home against Minnesota. 9.9K. I like him up there with Fernandez, a little bit less, but if you kind of want to swerve off of the pack and just hope Fernandez doesn't have a lights out performance, Sonny Gray is a nice guy to fall back on. And Lance Lynn at 9.3K falls into that category as well. Against the Mets at home, as we've seen, this Mets offense has been struggling for the most part. They kind of had a breakout leading into the All-Star break, but I'm thinking that's more of an anomaly than anything. So Lance Lynn, I think he's a safe pick at 9.3K, and I'd consider him, just kind of as a swerve option if I'm building multiple tournament lineups.
Yeah, and the Mets still 29th in the league against right-handed pitching, so certainly a good option there. As you're looking for cheap options, there's not a whole lot. For the most part, I'm going to be sticking near the top here because some of these cheap guys are in pretty bad spots. I know a guy that had a good start last time out. We were talking before the show, Mike Leake, but he's bad against left-handed batters. This is an all-lefty lineup, so really not a guy that I'm going after. Really, for me, there's not a single one of these cheap guys that I really have any sort of confidence in. I guess if I'm going to play one of the cheap guys, if I had to, it would probably be Charlie Morton, just because he's effective. But at the same time, this is a Milwaukee offense that is finally starting to wake up. They're finally healthy, so even him you don't feel great about. Just not a lot of upside from these cheap guys here.
Yeah, one guy that I'm kind of looking at, but I don't know if I'm going to do it, is Kyle Hendricks. Like you said, not a ton of upside, but he's 7.3K, right in that range with Charlie Morton. He could give you a quality start, 7 innings, maybe 4 or 5 strikeouts, decent chance at the win against an Atlanta team that's just kind of a hodgepodge lineup at this point in the year. So I don't really mind him. I think he's one of the more viable pitchers in that range, but I don't know if I'm going to go there.
Yeah, I think that's a fine spot, especially because, like you said, that's a pretty depleted lineup right now, so not a whole lot of resistance. As we move over to catcher, always some good options. Of course, you want Buster Posey against the lefty in Arizona at Chase Field if you can, but 4,400 is a pretty prohibitive price tag. So I'll throw out one cheap guy. I know you've got a cheap guy, and we've got a couple other people to mention. Derek Norris burned some people recently, but you got to have a short memory. This is a guy who was really good against left-handed pitching throughout his career. Jorge De La Rosa, a very beatable pitcher. Pitching in San Diego, so obviously not nearly the upside there is in Coors, or really most stadiums here. But Jorge De La Rosa just hasn't been great this season. 313 WOBA allowed to righties is okay. But Derek Norris at near minimum salary, definitely a guy I'm still looking at here because I think that the Padres are going to do some damage tonight.
Yeah, I don't really mind that either. I think that's a nice tournament play. Salvador Perez is going to be the cash game play tonight, and I think he's going to have a very high ownership percentage, especially pairing him with Jose Fernandez. I think that's a great way to get savings and then kind of load up at other positions. He's 2.4K in a righty-lefty matchup against John Danks and a park boost in U.S. Cellular. So I think, I don't know, my opinion is that that's the no-brainer cash game play for near minimum salary. But if you want a tournament pivot away from the popular option in a similar price range, I really like Chris Iannetta in a righty-lefty matchup against Wade Miley. He's 2.6K. I actually did a piece for Roto World over the All-Star break, and it was looking at underrated split stats, and I found that over the past 3 years, Chris Iannetta is just as good at hitting lefties as Buster Posey is, so that's kind of surprising. But, I mean, it just shows his upside. He's been on kind of a roll leading up to the All-Star break, so, I mean, you like that upside, and you like him because it's going to have a lower ownership percentage because everyone's going to be on Perez.
Yeah, that's a really good call. I like that a lot. And then I'll throw out another guy, Stephen Vogt at $3,000, gets Irvin Santana, who's only made 2 starts this year, but he's allowed 4 home runs already in those 2 starts. So I think Stephen Vogt, despite being in Oakland, he's got a ton of power against righties. I think he's a fine play as well.
Yeah, one more, Evan Gattis, 3.3K, righty-lefty matchup against Perez in Houston. Don't really mind that either as a tournament pick.
Yeah, and I'll throw out John Jaso as well. He's been hitting pretty well since coming up. Hutchison better against lefties than righties, but still not a guy you're going to be avoiding with left-handed bats.
Yep.
First base options, as always, there are quite a few. You're looking at these guys in the mid to high 3K range. Anthony Rizzo against Julio Teheran is going to be an interesting play. Teheran is a guy who really, really struggles with left-handed batters. 375 WOBA allowed so far this season, so he's a good option. Assuming that he's in the lineup, and there's not an official word, but we're assuming he's had enough rest, he should be good to go. Jose Abreu at 3.3K, a fine play against flyball pitcher Chris Young. But if not him, I don't mind going down for cheap if you need to spend money elsewhere, maybe get a Mike Trout in the outfield and going with his teammate Adam LaRoche at minimum salary.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I think it's between those two against Chris Young, preeminent fly ball pitcher at about 60% over the past few years. So, yeah, that's a great spot looking for some home run upside. And, I mean, that's essentially what you are looking for at first base. So it kind of makes sense to get cheaper prospects in that regard. Otherwise, like you said, I think Abreu is going to be the safe cash game play because he has another element on top of that power upside that can give you some solid production. If he's not in and you like the rest of your lineup, I think Joey Votto is the pivot against Trevor Bauer, another fly ball pitcher, not quite as much as Chris Young. I don't think anyone is quite as much as Chris Young in the history of baseball. No. But I like Joey Votto at Great American Ballpark as well. I'm surprised you kind of glossed over your favorite player, Albert Pujols, in a righty-lefty matchup against Wade Miley. I think he deserves some tournament appeal. He has been pretty bad leading up to the All-Star break in the last series, but I think that's going to steer some people away maybe. So 4.1K, don't really mind that either. Yeah, and that's basically all I have. One more guy, Logan Morrison in Yankee Stadium, gets that shift. Especially if he's hitting towards the top of that lineup. As we've seen, Tanaka isn't the dominant pitcher that he was for the first half of last season. His velocity's way down due to that, lingering injury. So he has given up the deep ball. He has given up runs. So I'm not afraid to target some Seattle bats if the price is right, and Logan Morrison falls into that category.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. Definitely cheap power there. And if you want another cheap piece of John Danks as a cash game option, Kendrys Morales at $2,800 is not a bad option for you either. All right, second base. We were talking before the show. Looks like there's 2 guys you and I are trying to get in our lineups. If not one, we're going to get the other more than likely. Jose Altuve at $4,300 gets a lefty at home. We know what kind of damage he does against lefties. If not him, Neil Walker against Mike Fiers. You had a good point before the show talking about how Mike Fiers isn't striking anyone out now, so now all he is a volatile pitcher that gives up too many home runs. And Neil Walker finished the break fairly strong. He had a couple multi-hit games right before the end there. Had that one big game a few weeks back as well. So definitely night and day from where he was at the beginning of the season after a slow start. But I think he's going to be a popular play tonight once again.
Yeah, Neil Walker is one of my cash game picks that I think is pretty safe tonight. Mike Fiers 342 WOBA against lefties this season, and he also ranks second overall in MLB amongst qualified pitchers in hard contact rate. So, I mean, he's not striking anyone out. Means, more people making contact, and when they're making contact, they're hitting the ball pretty well. So that lines up well for Neil Walker tonight. Otherwise, I think Robinson Cano at 3K is someone to consider for a tournament for the same reasons outlined as Logan Morrison. Otherwise, if you're spinning down a little bit, don't hate me for saying this. I don't know how I feel about it, but Omar Infante is minimum salary. I know he hits like ninth most nights, but I don't know. That Royals lineup is just, I think they're going to turn over, and Infante is going to be in a pretty good position with the top of the lineup behind him. Righty-lefty matchup against John Danks. Minimum salary. Maybe if you just want to click him in, you're not inspired by Neil Walker or anyone else in that range, which, I mean, second base, you don't have to pay up tonight. I don't think there's any great options. I think Walker's the best of, average or so options. So, I don't know. Maybe it makes sense to punt the position, and Omar Infante is one of those guys who can, give you some solid production for minimum salary.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I would play most people, including me and you, as righties against John Danks. So definitely a guy that's in play, especially if you need to save some salary for other positions. A couple more guys I want to mention. Rougned Odor, been batting 8th. You don't like that. If for some reason he gets a little bit better of a lineup spot, Colin McHugh has not been the pitcher that he was last year. He actually hasn't been too bad against left-handed batters this year. 288 WOBA allowed is actually pretty solid, but Odor's the guy who's been making a lot of hard contacts, so definitely a tournament option if he's batting down the order. I don't mind him as an option if he's batting higher in the order, though. And then one more guy I'll throw out, and this is another one of those ones you don't feel great about, but if you're a BVP believer, Jed Jerko is 12 for 18 off of Jorge De La Rosa. So min salary, second baseman, another one of those guys you don't feel great about, but obviously there's something to that. 18 at-bats, and he's got hits in 2/3 of them.
Hashtag BVP.
Hashtag. So get that trending there for Mr. Jed Jerko tonight. Third base options, there's a couple that we really like. You and I were talking one guy in particular. So for me not having to be a homer and say it, why don't you go ahead and say it? That way I can just agree with you.
Well, I think people already know what we're getting at here, so maybe we can move on. No, but Todd Frazier, his price actually came down, 3.8K, so I think he's very attainable at that level. And he's just a guy you feel good about having in your lineup. He's going up against Trevor Bauer at home, Great American Ballpark. As we know, I mean, he's been awesome there. He's been awesome pretty much everywhere this season. But you get a top-tier player against a mediocre pitcher that's struggled this season, that's struggled with fly balls, home runs, for 3.8K. And I think you can blend him easily into a lineup. So there's not many other, must-play third basemen that are well-priced. So I think it makes sense to go Frazier there, and I'm going to have him in majority of my cash games.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, that price decrease is just too good to pass up today. A couple other interesting options. Chris Bryant is $3,400 against Julio Teheran, who I mentioned earlier has been worse against lefties than righties, but Bryant, another one of those guys with a ton of power, and Teheran just not a guy I have much faith in. Even the games where he has good starts, he ends up blowing up by the end, stays in too long, runs out of gas. Bryant can definitely punish some mistakes. And then I'll throw out one more tournament guy that I know there's a cheap guy you like. Miguel Sano. I'm not trying to target Sonny Gray, but this guy since coming up has just been crushing the ball. He's $2,600. He's got 4 multi-hit games in his last 10. Got a couple homers under his belt. A home run or a double in 7 of those 10 games. So just keep that, 6 of those 10 games. So keep that in mind as a tournament cheap option tonight.
Yep. So Frazier is my cash game play. Otherwise, some tournament picks that I'm going to have exposure to when making out multiple teams. A-Rod against the lefty at home, 3.7K. I think that's a nice pivot. A lesser owned pivot off of Frazier for the similar price. Otherwise, Matt Duffy, 3.3K. I think that's a bit too expensive for cash games, but he has upside. That whole Giants offense, as we've seen the past week, has upside, especially in the park shift to Chase Field in Arizona. So righty-lefty matchup. I don't really mind that for some tournament upside there. Otherwise, if you're going cheap, Kyle Seager, for the same reason I outlined with Logan Morrison, he's only 2.5K. Park shift to Yankee Stadium, that short porch right field. We all know he's a pull hitter. Just loves hitting the ball to right field, and Yankee Stadium might help him tonight get a home run, a cheap home run at that. So 2.5K, and he was kind of heating up before the All-Star break, getting multiple hits in 3 of the past 4 games, including 3 hits in 2 of those. So I don't know. I like him. I think if you're diving into the bargain bin, Kyle Seager's probably the best at third base.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Shortstop options, there's not a whole lot of them. I know there's 2 guys in particular. One that you are on a lot, Alcides Escobar, kind of your de facto cash game play most nights, especially a night like tonight where you're going against John Danks. So I think that's the guy you're going to have in your cash games. If you want a pivot, a swerve, Aidney Hecker-Varria, $2,300, gets Adam Morgan tonight. Usually bats in the top 3 against lefties. Has pretty good splits against lefties as well. So I think that's the swerve. But like you said, Alcides is one of those guys, much like Salvador Perez and Jose Fernandez, going to be a popular play tonight in cash games. So if he has a big game, going to be tough to catch up with somebody else.
Yeah, Alcides is my lock for cash games. I mean, just can't beat that salary leading off against John Danks. And I'm going to have other Royals too, like Sal Perez, and I know as we'll get into in the outfield. So I think it makes sense to have Alcides the leadoff man there, and just hope they kind of feed into each other as far as fantasy production goes. So then, other than that, I have some tournament plays here. Brandon Crawford against Robbie Ray. He gets the park upgrade, as we mentioned, in Arizona. And Crawford is one of those guys. He's a left-handed hitter, so a lot of times you like to shy away from the lefty-lefty matchup. But over the past 2 years, he's actually hit left-handed pitching better. And Robbie Ray has some decent numbers given up to decent from the hitter perspective, I should say, given up to left-handed bats. So I think Crawford's a very sneaky pick at 3K. A lot of people will be shying away from the lefty-lefty matchup, not realizing that he's actually, that's where he's preferred, is against, mediocre left-handed pitchers. So I really like that for tournaments. Otherwise, you have Carlos Correa. You really can't ignore this guy. You can't ignore his upside. He gets Perez, the left-hander, at home. I think that's a fantastic matchup at 3.6K. So if you're paying up, I think he's the guy to go with for tournaments.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, a lot of hard contact there. Definitely a guy with some monster upside, like you said. Outfield, everybody knows about Mike Trout, even more so now that he got a free car after winning MVP again in the All-Star game.
Another one.
Yeah, another free car to add to his garage. So Mike Trout at 5,400, going to be your top play. Tough to fit if you're going to pay for a lot of these guys, but you can certainly make it happen tonight. I know one guy I like as a swerve to Trout is Andrew McCutchen against Mike Fiers. Mentioned all the hard contact he gives up. Miller Park, a great hitter's park, and once again a BVP. 16 at-bats. McCutchen has 6 hits, 4 home runs off of Mr. Mike Fiers. So I like that. And I know there's another guy that you're looking at as an alternative to Trout as well.
Yeah, I think Bryce Harper. It's weird to say that he's kind of a swerve, but I think a lot of people, if they're paying up, they're going to go for Trout. So Bryce Harper against Mike Bolsinger. Bolsinger gives up a 350 WOBA against left-handed bats, and as we know, Bryce Harper always has upside, regardless of the matchup. So this is a nice matchup for him to take advantage of. Otherwise, looking down for cash game options, a little bit cheaper, but still in that upper mid-range, lower top range as Lorenzo Cain, picking on John Danks some more. So 4K, he's just been sizzling hot over the past 2 weeks. You really like his prospects. He can get it done. He can hit a homer, especially at U.S. Cellular, given that park shift. Or he can, get 3 hits, a couple doubles, score 2 runs, and you're set. So I really like him. I think he's a comfortable cash game option at 4K.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. A couple other options here. Matt Kemp and Justin Upton, both throughout their careers, hitting lefties pretty well. Mentioned some good numbers against Jorge De La Rosa. This team, current team, batting 393 off Jorge De La Rosa throughout all their careers. So definitely a place where you want some exposure despite it being in Petco. I wouldn't go too crazy with it, but a couple bats I think is a fine way to go. A couple other options. Both A.J. Pollock and David Peralta are guys that I'm looking at home against Matt Cain. Cain had that one bad start, bounced back with a better start, but I'm still not a believer that he's the pitcher that he once was. So I think those guys, great tournament options for you. And then I'll throw out my favorite cheap play for you. Justin Maxwell, men's salary, $2,200, gets a lefty in Arizona. He mashes left-handed pitching, and gotta love the park upgrade into Chase Field now.
Yeah, I like that Maxwell call, especially for tournaments. I think he's going to have a lower ownership percentage, and as you said, he has that upside. One other cash game play I like, kind of in the lower mid range, is Chris Young against a lefty at home. He's just been mashing left-handed pitching this season. He's 2.8K. I think he makes for a nice, comfortable play there. Otherwise, my favorite cash game cheap play is Gregory Polanco against Mike Fiers. Will be batting first or second tonight. Has kind of been coming around. He had a huge slump that sent him down to this near minimum salary price, but he's kind of coming around slowly but surely. And as we said, Mike Fiers just giving up a ton of contact as of late. So I think I like him. I'm most confident in him for those near minimum players, especially in that lineup spot. Otherwise, got to pick on John Danks at least one more. Alex Rios is minimum salary. He hits lefties extremely well. The only problem is that he'll likely be batting 7th or 8th, which you don't love. But considering the price point, minimum salary, I mean, you can take a chance on that. You don't have to exactly have the perfect lineup spot, because that Kansas City lineup is, they're going to go up and down the order. He has the top of the lineup hitting behind him. He should be just fine, in terms of racking up some production tonight.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm going to throw out one more tournament guy for you, Brandon Moss, $2,900 against Mike Leake, struggles with lefties. Small ballpark.
BVP there, too. I think he's like 2 for 3 or something with a home run and a double. So
you might be able to add to those numbers tonight.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely take that. That's a cheap source of power under 3K. So, all right, with that, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our optimizer, our cheat sheets. Lots of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.